Welcome to Fix SLP, the podcast shaking up the field of speech-language pathology. We're calling out the barriers that hold clinicians back, fixing broken systems that limit our care, and giving the power of our profession back to the people who live it every day. This is where fearless clinicians come together. It's time to change the field with our voices, leadership, and advocacy leading the way.
So let's fix SLP.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Jeanette. I finally have Preston back today after what seems like months and months and months away. He's back. Preston, it's good to see your face.
It's great to see you as well, Jeanette. It has been a very busy couple of months here in Arkansas. Just, trying to fight on multiple fronts and still fix SLP. It's a battle. I've had issues with my daughter's school. I'm trying to navigate as an active parent with a public school, and now getting into government shutdown mode and working at a state hospital. It has been a wild ride, but wow, it is so good to be back with you today, and I'm really excited about this.
I think there's something important for me to say here that you just dropped in briefly and was not the point of what you were talking about. But you're a dad with a kid dealing with stuff. Alexa has kids as well, and she has not been as present with us for some of those things recently. But between the three of us, man, we do this in real life. School this year, I think, is for different reasons, but crushing both of us, right? Like I'm in little kid mode, you're in like preteen mode. And, with every age brings different issues, and we're doing the best we can. So we're still trying to show up for you, and you might see a little less content here and there. My podcast editing schedule is completely different from what it was in the past. So, we get these episodes out now when I can, and we're still here. We're still working. But yeah, kids change stuff, right? So thanks for being transparent with that. So we're excited to be back together today. We have the best episode lined up for you guys. The crowd went wild online when a research article dropped recently. We had already been in talks with one of the authors for, I don't know, Preston, like over a year to get this author on to come talk with us. We had email issues. We had Jeanette's overwhelmed issues. But finally, today, we have Tobias Kroll and Phuong Palafox. They put out an article called The Invisible Workload of School-Based SLPs. And so we're going to talk about that. I feel like I have so much to talk about. This could be a 3-episode series, but I'll try to keep my mouth shut so we can keep it to 1 episode. And then the last thing before we jump in with our guests is don't forget, we are still selling tickets to our meetup in Washington, D.C. The price, I believe, when this drops is still our early bird price. It will jump up 2 weeks before. Tickets are limited. You can get those at fixslp.com. Thanks for joining us today. First of all, this article is not public access, correct?
It is in an ASHA journal, which are accessible to members. But I should have it on my ResearchGate.
Okay, on your ResearchGate.
And if they can't access it on ResearchGate either, let me know. I can always send them a PDF.
Yes, so that's what I wanted to lead with, because we certainly have a lot of followers who have dropped their Cs, who have dropped their membership. They might not be able to access this publicly. If you are interested, get a hold of me, if anything, and we will get it to you. But at the end, our authors and guests will tell you how to connect with them as well. So we don't want anyone to miss this. If you don't have access, if you're not an ASHA member, we've got you. So why don't you tell us sort of an overview of your study? And if you can, kind of tell us how your own personal experiences led you to working together and then to doing this research together.
So I have been within and alongside the schools for 2 decades, so serving as a school-based SLP. And then over time, I was bestowed opportunities to do leadership, which I declined on many occasions, but finally agreed to it. So I've been a district lead, and then in the state of Texas, which is where I'm from, we're divided into 20 regions. And I worked at Region 13, overseeing the 60 to 70 central school districts in the state of Texas. And I will say the one thing that I've realized, I'm a very big, warm, feely person. My eyeballs get wet every single day. I feel really big. And so whenever I'm serving my students and my speech language pathologist, I think people feel safe in terms of telling me how they feel. And so whenever I was lead, that was like in the early 2010s. I started hearing like, hey, Phuong, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm not getting home until 7 or 8. And what I realized is being a school-based SLP looks very differently than being in a leadership position where you have to adhere to compliance and funding, but then still keep your people feeling emotionally safe. So when I moved to Region 13, then I saw that it wasn't just my district, it was every single district. In 2007 or 8, I worked in a private clinic, but because I love the schools, I was always contracted out to the schools. And it was around that time that I started to realize, because in our district, we used a workload model, not a caseload model. But in the early 2010s, because funding was cut through the Texas legislature around then, I realized that our workload increased tremendously. Because special education director was like, hey, Phuong, we can't pay the contracted people anymore. We have to put the work back towards your own SLPs. But at that time, they were already screaming. And what was interesting to me is that as I moved through these organizations, I was like, my people are having a really hard time. And they're like, no, are they? It was interesting. Like every time I brought it up, and I was like, they are. And so in 2019, I wrote a book. It was called The Heartbeat of Speech Language Therapy. And in that book, it was the book that I wish I would have had starting out within the schools. And it was about the connection and the rapport. But then ultimately, we are tethered to these systems that say, no, this is how it is. And I'm like, is it really how it is? Because I know the law too. And so I wrote this book, and I looked at the people who purchased the book, and Dr. Tobias Kroll from Texas Tech University was one of those people. And so I reached out to thank him, like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for purchasing the book. And honestly, you're attached to a university. I'm curious why you purchased this book. So that's where our narratives intersected. Roll, we go through COVID, and then I would say in the fall of 2020, I don't know who initiated it, but we were like, we're going to pick this back up and we're going to make it research. So Phuong had her in the trenches hands. And at that point, I was still supporting schools through assessments and therapy, but doing a lot of professional development. I'm a big person on multilingual rights, culturally responsive practices, evidence-based practices, and advocacy for school-based SLPs. And then Dr. Kroll will share with you what he does in his lovely university. But it was a beautiful complement to doing this research.
Yeah, so as Fong said, we started working together around 2020, very broadly speaking. But my interest in this, I'm a teacher and researcher mainly, but my expertise is in child language literacy, right? So I'm naturally interested in what goes on in the schools. And all this time, as a student and later as a teacher and researcher, what I heard coming out from the schools wasn't good. And I did get a glimpse into it myself when I did my externship as a student, and I was working under a school SLP in an elementary school, and I just watched her essentially doing mainly paperwork. She always needed an extern or somebody by her side to do therapy because she didn't have time to do both. And I was like, yeah, something is very off here. And this was, mind you, this was before 2010, and it was in a different state too. So my job is to prepare students for this career. And if the career I prepare them for isn't a good one because they can't really serve their students, and make a difference like they want to, that doesn't make me feel good. So I've always kind of looked at that mess in the school-based world and was unhappy with it. And then when Fong, I think you cold called me, which was really surprising because all I get in cold calls in my office is spam usually, but this one time it was actually somebody who wanted to talk. So I saw the chance of putting my finger on what's going on in the schools and I jumped at it.
And I will say, when we first started this research, we went in thinking that SLPs did not know how to advocate. And so I think in the leadership positions that I have had in the past, that's the messaging that we also get from our national organization, is that we don't know how to do it. And so I am a big service delivery person. I like to try new and innovative things. Let's try something and then we'll ask permission for it later. But But that's what we went in thinking that we would do is we wanted to pull in overwhelmed school-based SLPs from the elementary level and at the secondary level, because I knew enough to know that it was a very different narrative for each setting, but why they were getting overwhelmed and how we could support them. But the findings that we found were not what we thought,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So I'll jump in just so we're clear and we frame this for everybody. So your purpose was really what you thought, but also you wanted to explain why so many school-based SLPs felt overwhelmed. And then I don't know if you wanted to do this or if this was something that came out of it, but you also wanted or ended up constructing a theory that grounded these school-based SLPs in their lived experience. Is that right?
Yes.
What's the name of your theory?
The invisible workload theory. So grounded theory is essentially you do qualitative research with the goal of understanding what's going on in a kind of formal-ish way. And that's what a theory is.
So you guys included these self-identified, overwhelmed SLPs, ended up with 12, and they were from elementary and secondary. So in all, was that kindergarten through 8th grade?
It was SLP starting with serving students starting at the age of 3 who also qualify for services, and then all the way through secondary SLPs up through 21. So it was the full gamut of speech language therapists.
Okay, so you had the 12. I don't know if you just want to jump right into findings. Like, what did you find? You said you thought SLPs didn't know how to advocate, but what did you find instead?
So I'll give the overview, and then Dr. Kroll can fill in with his PhD brain. But the most enlightening thing that we found out is that SLPs are in fact advocating, and they've been advocating relentlessly, which is kind of what I felt like was happening. But there was no research yet to be like, hey, this is a problem. And what I found enlightening is that whenever I was talking about this before, people were one saying, is this a problem? Which felt like gaslighting. And then when we eventually did do this research, it was presented at a university. I don't know if you remember this, Dr. Kroll, but somebody was like, I'm so glad that the research shows that the SLPs have been advocating, so we know that it's true. And so the interesting thing about research is that people say if the research doesn't happen, then it wasn't true. But these are the lived experiences of our peers, and there are many school-based speech language therapists. And so I'm really grateful that this happened. So we found out that they are in fact advocating, but what was happening is that when you are advocating to someone with more power. I think a lot about power dynamics within a space. And so when you're like, yo, I need help, the people who oversee us, whether it be your district lead, your district coordinator, the special education director, they would say, okay, sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't listen, or sometimes they're like, you know what, you really have to go back and just get the work done. And so we found a trifecta of contributors that contributed to this invisible load of overwhelm. And one of those factors is that people don't understand us. And I will say that for me, I understand that most of our leadership, they're not school-based SLPs. And that is a whole thing that we can dive into. And most special education directors are not speech language therapists. So when I worked at Region 13, I had to present to all the central school-based SLP directors, and there was only one SLP in that whole room full of directors. And that's because of the way the job description is written. You have to have a teaching degree, and you have to have, so usually it's diagnosticians or educational psychologists who become special education directors. So that to me was the most enlightening part, that we are in fact advocating, but the people with the most power are not necessarily listening to it, or if they are listening to it, they don't feel like they can do anything about it.
And I think everything that you just said, we obviously have a very broad audience. And while we're discussing your work in the schools, all of this directly applies to healthcare too. Nothing is different. Just change the setting. I personally ran into this exact thing in a nursing home yesterday, advocating to someone who isn't a speech pathologist, who I made a recommendation, and they literally said to me, why does that matter? What's going to change? This is going on everywhere. So I don't want people to tune out either. With your research, it was in the schools, but I mean, change school to hospital and it all applies.
And Phuong, I'm wondering, because you touched on it briefly about who SLPs in the school are talking with, but for those out there that are listening right now, they might be wondering, what does it look like when I'm advocating? Because I may be doing it and not knowing it. What's the type of conversation that they're having with these superiors in their school?
Looking at it through the lens of our roles and responsibilities. So we have speech language therapists who are doing their campus jobs. And so they may be telling their district lead or district coordinator, hey, I feel like I'm just really overwhelmed right now. I feel like I'm not getting my job done. I feel like there's a lot of compliance tasks that I'm having to whittle at the top of my list, but I don't feel good about making an impact with my students. And it's interesting that you asked that question, Preston, because I do feel like there's also SLPs who don't even feel safe enough to even get to that point. And so that's a whole other part that we're not even getting their stories and their messages. So there are those SLPs. And then there are people in SLP leadership positions who are advocating to the special education director. So now we're moving to a second tier of advocacy where they're like, my SLPs are drowning. I need more people. And the special education director may say, we don't have any funding. In actuality, you have to cut your people because our funding's been cut, so we can't even ask for help from contracted people. And so it's advocacy on all of those regards. And I think something that is important to delineate is that when SLPs are saying, I need help, that's what the advocacy looks like. But I think sometimes they take that messaging and they think they are just whining and saying that they can't do the job. So I think it's also important to think about. I do think they're always advocating, but sometimes they take that story and they turn it inward and they say it's a me problem when we're saying it actually isn't a you problem. It's not an SLP problem. It's a systems problem. And the system, which is what y'all are all about, the system is severely broken.
One of the examples that drove it home for me, I think the most, was a secondary SLP who was talking about her nonverbal students who are 16, 17, 18 years old. They're nonverbal, they lack basic communication skills, and everybody in the system, which includes parents and advocates and their principal, whoever, they say things like, oh yeah, they're 16, 17, 18, why don't you try to get them a Facebook account or get them on social media? And the SLP could not make these people understand that that's the wrong goal for somebody who lacks basic interpersonal communication skills. And I think that's a big part of, Phuong said it earlier, people just don't understand why what we do matters because they never look at communication as up close as we do.
Yeah, that gets into the age-old thing I encountered in my setting. I work in a psychiatric hospital, but I have uh, students that are 13 to 17 years old. And I think about the number of SLPs out there that are defined as the speech teacher, and we're just these correctionists when I have literally had to go in with the diagnosis code for cognitive, or excuse me, for, social communication disorders and to explain what the value is there. So I think there are some SLPs that sometimes shy away perhaps from that older student population because they think, well, everybody said, why are you seeing them for speech? They sound fine. They make that this is over. But wow, that journey is still very much part of our scope of practice. And I know I advocate for that, but I think about those school SLPs out there and I think, wow, they must have a really tough road.
Yeah. Another example that I remember just now is the SLP who said, they told her you can stop working with the student. The student met his goal. And the goal was to say sentences.
Mm.
And she goes, yeah, okay, if I prompt him with 3 pictures in the sequence, he'll make up sentences on that. And then I change the pictures around and he can't do that anymore. How is that communication? They don't understand that. It's the goal says supposed to make sentences. When that's met, the system says, okay, he's done. And then the SLP can advocate all they want, and they do, and it goes nowhere. And I think just grinding against that wall all the time, that's where the overwhelm really comes in.
And I think too, I had already mentioned that we came up with a trifecta, 3 reasons as to the ways that school-based SRPs are feeling overwhelmed. And I talked about the first group, which is that people don't understand what we do, from the teachers to the principals to the leadership to our own special education leadership to I think even between elementary and secondary, I think sometimes we don't know what the other side is doing. But the other two contributing factors, the next one is the hierarchy and the way the system is organized. And so school-based SLPs are hired typically at the district level. And then we get placed on these campuses and then sometimes we're placed plural on multiple campuses. And so it's kind of like, who are we responsible to? Is it the principal and the assistant principal in that campus? Is it multiple campuses? If something goes awry, is it the principal or the special education director or the district leadership? And so we're kind of in these spaces where there's no one who truly takes responsibility for us, but we are connected because I love my campuses directly to the students and the families on my campuses. And then, so that contributes to it as well. And then the third aspect to that trifecta is, and I thought this was enlightening, and Dr. Kroll was like, wait a second, there's a whole thing here, is there was an SLP culture that emerged from our qualitative study. And so they were sharing all of their sentiments. We did like but a line by line analysis, but there was this culture of martyrdom where SLPs go in, and I'm going to say that this intersects with a majority of our field being female, it intersects with other aspects of our field. We are also helper types. So it'll be like, well, nobody else could do it, so I stepped in to do it. So I go into this classroom, I didn't have minutes, but I went in to help out this teacher because she needed so much help. But then you go home and you help because we're the helper types. We injected ourselves into these positions that we did not need to be in. And then at the end of the day, we're resentful for the work that we have to do. And so not, and with research, we're putting these broad strokes on people and not everybody is like that. But there was this idea of, and I'll say with me as someone who's been through a lot of therapy, is that I was helping all the time, but I wasn't creating boundaries for my own life whenever I went home at the end of the day to my own 3 children. So those were the 3 contributing factors, which was enlightening.
Yeah. Themes. They were big themes of what came out of this. I found the SLP culture stuff most enlightening.
I might be going down a bit of a rabbit hole on this one, but I thought about what you meant on this, kind of there's the lack of understanding, and then there's kind of just feeling like we're cloistered into this sort of role, and almost in the physical sense, where the speech happens in this one little room, and we take all the students in there, and it's like this little lab where we do all of these things, which almost adds to the mysticism of what speech language pathology is. And I have been really happy lately because where I live in Arkansas, it is now finally starting to get cooler. And I finally, the other day, I just got sick of having the same pragmatic discussion groups, which, revolved around some very effective worksheet activities and, a ground framing work of what we're going to discuss socially. And I said, guys, the weather's great. Let's go out and have a kickball game, and we'll work on good camaraderie and communication skills in a team setting. And I think about those school SLPs that are sometimes working between 2, perhaps even as many as 4 buildings or more. And they're in these little places where it's like, they're doing speech in there. And sometimes being part of a community in whether it's a nursing facility or it's in my case in a hospital setting, but in the school in particular, there are so many things to be valued where the SLP sometimes feels just like they're locked, like Rapunzel in the tower. Was that kind of something that you might have picked up on as well?
I think you are segueing not into a rabbit hole, but into what I think are some things that we can do about it. And I'll be honest, my personality is I'll acknowledge what is honest and what is true, but I don't like to sit there and complain. I want to do something about it. And so I think that is a beautiful example of we are siloed, purposely siloed, like the system silos us. And so what we do is we are in these closets or closets in a library closet or next to the bathroom or wherever we're placed. And so people physically don't even know what we do. So then whenever it comes time to say, hey, it's time for graduation. And that's the word that I use is graduation, not dismissal, because people think that's a deficit model. But whenever I say it's time for graduation, but they have not seen me at all in the last several years, and they think this is the idea of speech language therapy, then there is going to be not positive interactions. But I think that that is one of the things that we can do is that SLPs need to acknowledge one that they are being siloed. So you're going to walk into that campus like the king, the queen at the court that you are, being like, I know more about communication rights and communication and language acquisition than any other human being. Now, teachers, on the other hand, know, or they're the content experts. We're the communication experts. So it's actually taking ownership over those roles. And I actually don't like to be in my speech therapy room. I like to be outside. I like to have these big groups and I like to go get my kids. And when we're walking down the hall and I'm doing my story, grammar, rap, or whatever it is, people are like, ooh, what you doing? And I'm like, I'll tell you what I'm doing. We're working on story grammar. And they're like, but we do that. And I'm like, yes, you do. Which is then what leads me into like service delivery model, which I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I think the 30 minutes twice a week of pulling kids into this secret layer doesn't serve us, right? It fuels that whole narrative of us being in these magical, mystical towers. The other thing too is that I like to, if I get a lot of referrals in the spring, which school-based SLPs do, and over again, I'm doing all these assessments and these kids don't qualify because the referral was not appropriate. Well, if you do something once and it goes astray, I can let it go. But if something happens to you again and again and again, you got to change that stuff. And so perhaps you need to do a campus-wide educational experience where you're like, do you actually know that this is our eligibility criteria for a school-based SLP, which is what I've done at my campuses in the past. And they were like, I didn't know that. So we're arguing about these things and about eligibility when nobody is talking about why we have these perceived ideas. And then now you have SLPs going to the school board and they're like, do you know we see a majority of special education students? Do you know this is what we do? Do you know that we bring in funding through Medicaid billing? And school boards are like, we actually had no idea. And they don't know because we never told them. We're just pissed off at the end of the day because people don't agree with our recommendations. But we never built the trust or the knowledge base to potentially feed into how they perceive us. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. And I wrote a note for myself. I put misunderstandings of roles and responsibilities. And with these teachers and admins and parents who don't know what we do, I said to myself, we're largely responsible for this misunderstanding. I think there's two things here. One, what you just said, we assume people know what we do and we haven't told them. But two, I think there's this second layer, and maybe Tobias sees some of this. I think sometimes, especially with newer clinicians, they also don't know what they do. Either they've been taught poorly or they've had a bad experience or they've had an externship or internship experience with a clinician who was so overwhelmed that she couldn't take the time to teach by no fault of her own, but because of these very things that we're talking about here. And so the student who is now the professional didn't have the model in the first place to even know exactly what it was he or she should be doing. And so she grabs the kid or he takes her to the room in the closet. And what we don't like to say in this field is fake it until they make it, because they just haven't been adequately prepared, which is a systemic problem that we might start talking about later. But, it's these two things. Either we just assume and haven't told, or there wasn't enough preparedness in the first place. Both can be fixed, right? Like you said, we can do these campus-wide educations, or, the person who was underprepared can own that, and it's okay, kind of like I did when I went into nursing homes. I was a school SLP. I started working in nursing homes at night, realized I had no clue what I was doing, and started getting myself educated from quality educators and quality mentorship and continuing education. So I think there's a way to address both of those, but we have to own that. Mm-hmm. We can't blame it on others that they don't know what we do or I wasn't prepared. It's where we are. And like you said, what can we do about it? And I think either one of those things are very fixable.
If I may jump in there with a few thoughts. One, I think you're absolutely right. We oftentimes don't understand what we do, and that's partly because of the way we're taught. As one of my pet peeves with the profession and with my own job, frankly, is that we focus so much on details. I am not sure all of our students leave grad school with a sound understanding of just the basics of what is human communication. How does it work? What is it for? What's the role of communication in everybody's life, in quality of life, in personhood, and all that? I think if we put more emphasis on that, we might have a better idea how all those technical pieces fit into place and what patients need. And so that's one. The other thing is, Phuong, I know you, I've known you for years now. You're a go-getter. I can totally see you assaulting that school board and going, hey, you're going to listen to me. I'm going to tell you what communication is. But we had at least one of our SLPs in the focus groups who said, I know what I should be doing. I should be talking to those people higher up, but I don't know how to make those connections. And it takes, I call it political skills, but maybe that's not the right word. Maybe it's just a matter of barging into doors, having the confidence to do that. But not everybody has that. I know I don't. I wouldn't know how to network and make friends with people higher up. And finally, final thought. Remember, I wanna question your takeaway a little bit, Jeanette, when you say we are largely responsible. We as a profession
Yes.
are responsible, including people like me, Asha, us as a population.
Yes.
The individual clinician, I would not place the responsibility on them because, I mean, that's our whole finding, right?
Right.
If one individual clinician tries to pursue unusual routes to educate the system, they're usually grinding themselves to burnout.
Thank you for clarifying that, because a lot of these things are a result of the system, of us as a systemic system as a whole, not because I wasn't paying attention myself in school and then wasn't prepared. It's that systemic system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do want to say something and challenge something you said. I don't know how to network. I am going to push back against that big time because you reached out to us, and I'm going to be honest on the pod, and this is my confession. I sometimes am a bit wary of academia, but you are an academician that took off the academia pearls and said, I'm going to communicate with these folks and I'm going to reach out and have a conversation. And that meant a lot. And I think that that's the genesis where you and Phuong have produced this wonderful piece of research. And so you may say you aren't much of a networker. I think you are, sir. And I really appreciate the open conversation you've had because you're curious and you ask questions and you want to expand the SLP paradigm of what's out there. And I really thank you for that.
I want to jump in and say I agree. As a colleague from academia, it was really nice to hear from someone who wasn't afraid of us and was willing to take that step, because not only did you contact us, but you contacted us pretty early in this game when people were either saying nasty things to us or not talking to us at all from academia. You've been our little hero, that your name has not gone away, even though it's taken this long to chat with you. We really did appreciate it.
Well, I sure appreciate that. Thank you both. And just for the record, that's to me what academia is for. I mean, I'm tenured, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means it's really hard to get rid of me. And if they try to get rid of me by some shady ways, I know how to fight back. So that's exactly the position you want to be in as an academic, so you can do unusual things that maybe other people would be afraid of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm determined to make the best out of it. And just, let me do a plug for my colleagues real quick.
Yeah.
I know there's this perception that academics and clinicians are somehow two different species, and there's a research practice gap and all that. But most people that I know in my field that are in academia, they care a lot about clinicians.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them have been clinicians.
Mm-hmm.
So let's not exaggerate that gap.
Yeah. I had thought of this a little bit earlier and just popped into my head again when you're advocating. My lived experience is my second or third year in the schools. I think school hadn't even started yet. And I think I was starting with a caseload of like 82. And in Ohio, we have a caseload cap of 80, which is never followed. And I knew there would be people moving in and referrals, and I was having a couple of issues. So the first thing I was doing is I was in 4 different buildings within a district, and making my schedule was becoming very challenging. And so I was trying, as a new clinician in this district, I wanted to collaborate and work with the teachers. And I don't know what happened before I was there, but there was very much, I could perceive this kind of attitude that I was going to be a problem, right? And in Ohio, they're called educational service centers. So I worked for that. And so I wasn't a school employee. And they very much made me know, they made sure I understood that I didn't work for the school. And teachers would not let me schedule the students. So there's reading, there's math, there's like, okay, well, what time can I take the student? Well, you can have them on this day at this time. Okay, well, I'm across the district that day. And so I couldn't get anyone scheduled because they were all doing this to me. And then I have this huge caseload. So I went to my supervisor and I said, number one, at what point do I get worried about the caseload of 82 without the year even starting? And I was told, you don't worry about it. You just do your job. That's what I was told. No support. And then she recommended that I go to the principal to talk about the issues, especially in the elementary school where my caseload was the heaviest. And I am a young clinician, 2-3 years out of school, not a ton of confidence, but I mean, you've seen me on Fix SLP. I've always had this grit and this attitude. So I am going to speak up for myself. So I was very kind, nervous because this is an authority figure who I do not know, but I did it. And I knocked and I said, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk? So I thought I was coming in, like not barging in, asking for permission. Yeah, sure. I have time. And I said, I wanted to talk to you because I'm having a problem. And what he said to me was, oh, really? Because I hear you're causing a problem. And that's how I started my year. Right? Like, you don't belong here. Just do your damn job and you're a problem. Like, and that was my last year in the schools. And thank God that was the year I found dementia and swallowing. And, here I am today. So everything works out like it's supposed to. But I can't imagine if your passion is schools. I found out that year that wasn't my passion and I moved on. But what if that is your passion? Like, that's how you're starting your career. I could see that, just that one lived experience that I've had, how rough it can be.
I'm sorry.
We talk about that in the article towards the end. It's like we all go into this field because we care about one thing or another, or something makes us care enough to go into this field. And then we work against these powerful people who clearly do not care. Mm-hmm. And it's like you were shoved from one place to another. No, talk to that person, and nobody cared. And that to me is one of the most depressing takeaways, because in that environment, if you do your job and try to advocate for yourself and your students, you're going to get burned out by the lack of caring and the toxicity.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that happened to you, Jeanette. And
I
think too, it goes back to the impact that we know that we could have. But this goes to one of the trifectas, right? Like, they didn't understand our roles and our responsibilities. And honestly, whenever we're getting our training at the educational level at universities, we're told, like, think about service delivery, think about collaboration, think about interdisciplinary, it's all these multisyllabic words. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And then you get out into the real world and they're like, this isn't how it's been done.
Mm-hmm. This isn't how we do it.
And I also think, which then feeds into that second trifecta, which is how we're organized. Mm-hmm. And so if you're at a bunch of campuses and you said you had 4, and you think about, I love human brain and feelings and emotions, and I like to geek out on those kind of podcasts, but like, we don't have the opportunity to build the trust for people to be like, oh, I'm even going to take your idea in, Jeanette. They're like, this is how the machine goes. But you're like, but I need to pull out these kids and da-da-da. So it's kind of like we can't even have these emotional experiences with our campuses because of our high caseload, which then brings me to something else when it comes to what is something we can do about it. I know that we've brought up ASHA a couple of times, and I am not an advocate of saying, this organization is good or bad. That's binary thinking anyways. But one way that I feel like we could get some help is if there was advocacy from our national organization to work with universities, because if this information was taught at the universities within departments of education for teachers and administrators, it actually would help us significantly. And this could be like a 10-minute couple of slides, honestly, because we just have our own speechy world, right? With communication sciences and whatever departments across the country. But if school teachers knew this is what we do and this is our criteria, they would not be pushing up against us every time we say, that's not a school-based need.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like something like that could be huge. And then the other acknowledgement is knowing that SLPs are advocating. So if SLPs really are advocating, we should not be pushing PR that says, do more, do more, do more, do more. And in reality, maybe what we should be doing is connecting with other organizations like educational psychologists, like, I don't know, the Teachers National, I don't know what these organizations are.
Teachers unions. Yeah.
Teachers unions. Is there a way for us to put our effort towards those organizations, because they're the ones who respond to our advocacy, because they're not responding right now? But it shifts the onus away from us when we're working really hard and we don't have the time to do more, or feel safe enough, which is what you were talking, or somebody was talking about, the safety part. But I think these are some shifts that we could make that could yield some like better outcomes than telling our SLPs they're not doing enough.
Yeah. I think that's great too, because ASHA as an organization, a membership organization that should be representing us and helping us move forward as a profession, that's a great solution. And I think Fix SLP exists because so many people feel that ASHA's absent in these types of topics and issues. Or a lot of times what they'll tell people is we can't do that, but they absolutely could do something like you just said, that they make a lot of these recommendations for us to do this, but don't really back it with the resources or the like forward facing help like you're suggesting, which would go a long way. And again, just to keep our medical people engaged, they could be doing those same things in medical schools with swallowing and aphasia and language, reaching into these other organizations, and they don't need a whole class, but a lecture, or even if it was pre-prepared, that it's a video that these students are watching, that would really go a long way. I love that idea. And I think it would help, because it helps with that. People don't understand what we do. And this is one way to plant that seed. Because even if they forget it, because they're students too, then when an SLP or professional circles back, maybe it triggers something in their brain and they're like, oh yeah, that one professor did have that one thing that I vaguely remember. And yeah, I think that would help a lot.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea also that, you highlight the success stories, to find those clinicians that are in a school setting and things are functional. They do have that voice. They have advocated. They've paved that pathway. And the contrast of telling that story and sort of action oriented. And I think, Tobias, you said it well. It's like you have to kind of work a political system, but it's about advocacy. And at the start of this conversation, there's this assumption that, well, SLPs don't know how to advocate. And that may be true for some. Others, it may be that they don't know what that looks like. But highlighting what effective advocacy is goes a long way. And I'm not throwing shade here, I promise. But within the last year, there was a lot of conversation about an SLP that had, really juggled a caseload that was just some grandiose number, Jeanette. I think it was like 80 or 90.
No, it was 100. It was over 100. Yeah.
And there's a story to be told there, and that SLP has a lot of, merit. And so I'm not throwing the shade there. But what I'm saying is that sometimes it's like, rather than trying to teach someone how to survive in the chaos, it's sort of like, how do you carve a better space? How do you make our profession something that's even brighter? Because the story that may not have been in the research, and I'd be interested if it was, is what about those SLPs that just quit, that just left, or just went into another sector of the field and said, I can't do this? They are the ones that, in particular, that we really need to be advocating for, because what a loss that is. And so I want to see those highlighted stories of the people that have made those inroads in districts and have really carved that space.
And we have those stories. We have the people that say they're about to quit. We had those.
Yes.
And we had the ones that advocate. They clearly know how to advocate. It just gets them nowhere. And the success stories, there were essentially three things. One, SLPs just finding all kinds of creative ways of saying no and setting boundaries and then sending people scrambling to find that sub or whatever. Two, and I think really the major success story was SLPs banding together. Like as soon as more than one or two spoke up and try to change something, it sounded like that's a viable path. Except of course, not every SLP has that opportunity. Some are really isolated, right? And then the other thing that also clearly emerged from that study is leadership makes a difference and the systems make a difference. There's only so much you can do. And even the ones that did team up and advocated as collectively, even they said if the leadership doesn't care, if the system doesn't give a bit, then nothing will happen, no matter how we advocate. And that's where that top-down action by ASHA or by state organizations, associations, that needs to come in.
I remember too, when we talk about what are some proactive agency that you could do. So the collective camaraderie, which Dr. Kroll just talked about, the personal boundaries that SLPs need to make for themselves because advocacy is the long game. But when it comes to the collectivism, though, and coming together, even there was an SLP that said we got together and they still did not listen to us and they weren't able to make these changes.
Yep.
But we felt so much better just knowing that we weren't alone. And I think that is huge.
Yes.
And then, Preston, you said something that got me thinking too is that I like to look at what are the bright spots, like who are the people who are doing things well, and let's look at their framework to see what they are doing, and then maybe reduplicating that framework. But it is going for the people who feel safe enough. And I've noticed that it's usually people who've been in the field a while and they're like, they're not going to fire me. But they're the ones who go to the school board who feel safe enough because the new ones, like Jeanette, you didn't even know what you didn't know, right? And so they're the ones leading and then building the advocacy. And one thing I need to acknowledge too is that, I was out in Arkansas last year. I did y'all's keynote and another course, but there's a framework where I put together like, what are the pillars that support advocacy and disrupting systems. And that I think sometimes your advocacy is never wasted. And so you can advocate to leadership and they may say no, because I've been in that position to receive that because I couldn't do anything else because of my leadership. But then when things shift and change, I was able to do it later. And that also happens at the university level, which then applies not just to school-based Jeanette, but to everybody. So know that it is never wasted. And so you've done your part and maybe things aren't changing, but at least you can name what's going on. Like, I'm doing my best. I'm going to make my own personal boundaries, but the system is the one that is not responding to me. And so I think it gives them some ways to think and feel through all of this. Like, I got to do my own stuff. I can see what's going on. I'm doing my best and I've done my part and there may be change coming up.
We say that a lot around here, that one no doesn't always mean no forever, that you can revisit the topic that you're advocating for quarterly or a couple times a year or once a year. Keep asking, find different ways to ask, wait until leadership or people change and ask again, or that one no, because no is always going to be the immediate answer because it's the easiest and it requires the least amount of work in a lot of situations. But one no doesn't mean no forever. And so that you're right, things change and we just have to keep persevering for the things that we need. And I think that can lead into, in terms of setting these boundaries and persevering, is the word self-care was used in your article. And I think that's a buzzword generally in society. And I think there's some toxic positivity everywhere, but in our profession, and you brought up the word gaslighting earlier in the conversation, but we're just told, I think, by this organizational structure and leadership sometimes you need to have self-care. And I think a lot of us have hit the point where maybe we get a little angry when we're told. So why do you think there's like a self-care deflection, I guess? Prioritizing self-care makes people angry. Why do you think that is? Or why do you think it's becoming like this toxic positivity or institutional gaslighting? Or what are your thoughts about all of that?
It goes along directly with telling SLPs to advocate harder when they're not making a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of our interviewees, some of our focus group participants, they did say, yeah, I'm setting boundaries, I'm taking good care of myself. As a result, my district is out of compliance. So, and that's what I meant earlier when I said some have gotten really, let's say, confident in setting boundaries. Yeah, if people at the top tell you prioritize your own well-being, do self-care, but systemically nothing changes, then you will be out of compliance. Deal with it. And of course, it's not sustainable in the long run, right? And I think that goes a long way towards explaining why that. Just take good care of yourself and advocate harder. Yeah, if the system is not yielding no matter, then you either have the choice of grinding yourself to death or literally putting people out of compliance. And I'm not surprised people are angry at that.
I also think too, a couple of years ago, I collaborated with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Amanda Jelinek, and we put together a course on burnout specifically for educators. And so at that time, because it was a buzzword, people would invite us in and we would, kick off these conferences and talk about what it looks like. And what was interesting to me is that when you brought up the word performative earlier, is I do think at some level there is some leadership, not all, where they feel good that they're like, you take care of yourself. And I want you to take care of yourself, Preston and Jeanette and Tobias. And just because they said it, they felt good about it. But then whenever SLPs did start advocating, because the course that we had was here are ways for you to push back, they would talk to me later, before we'd have a Zoom meeting, they would jump on and they're like, Phuong, it would be a special education director. And this did happen. Can you believe this SLP? Like she was like telling me that she was going to advocate and she got other people to start pushing back. Can you believe that she did that? And I responded with, that's why you invited me to come into the district because you wanted to support them. And so I think that's where the gap is between, I think when we say that a word is a buzzword, we also have to acknowledge the nuances of that. I'm glad that it's being talked about, but we can't just say it at like a superficial level. I'm going to deep dive and be like, what does it really look like when you tell your SLPs to do self-care? Because if you gave them 20 more students, and I've had Texas SLPAs who were responsible for seeing 120 students. That's not okay that you say, take care of yourself, and then you back it up. But I think this is where there are a few of us who have you feel safe just saying what we want to say. And so I think that's where, like this group right here, right? Just in having this podcast, we feel safe enough to be like, hey, we know this is a thing. We know that it's hard. We know that you're advocating. And so it's so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that SLP's bottom line is that they are the only ones responsible for their own lives. Hard stop.
Yeah. And if you got to quit,
Mm-hmm.
quit en masse. Leave them alone if you have to. From the example that you just gave, by the way, there was a beautiful illustration of this idea of invisibility, right? People in charge, leadership, simply don't see us. They don't see what we're doing. They don't see what we would need. He literally didn't understand that the newfound advocacy was a direct result of what you did, what they asked you to do. Like they don't see it. It's like totally oblivious, and that's I think that is a hard grind that a lot of these burned out SLPs are up against.
I think in reflecting on some of your critiques, what I thought was the system is telling us to rest, self-care, rest, whatever, but they don't want us to resist. Rest, but don't resist. And then we have to remember that one participant that was in the study, I was thinking like, you can't yoga your way out of a broken structure, right? Take care of yourself. Don't resist. Go ahead and do the yoga or whatever. But at the top, if the organization and the structure and the systemic issues remain broken, we can do yoga all day long, or just to stick this in there because I can't help myself, we can cry in our cars all day, but nothing will change, right? It is that structural issue. It's not yoga studio and spa and scented candles. It doesn't matter what we do. Like you said, if leadership doesn't change, if the systemic stuff doesn't change, our hands sometimes become tied. So
I was thinking about the school SLPs that I know, and especially the ones that are in their first few years. One thing that I will hear from them is you have no idea the pressure that's being put on me by my special ed director at my school, where we're not IDEA compliant. And I sort of harken back. It's a familiar theme to me because I can remember getting involved in nursing homes years ago and people would say, well, Medicare requires that we have to see them this many minutes and things. And there were some things there that were not quite so. And I'm thinking about that gaslighting that can come from districts where as SLPs, we hear IDEA, we federal law. And is it, what do you say to those SLPs that feel like that's being used as a cudgel against them, where a district is triangulating them to try to make them feel like they're not doing something correctly, when in fact the law may actually be something that is to empower them?
I think for me, for our first year and newbie speech language therapists is doing their due diligence whenever they are seeking out places of employment. And we start talking about this, like ask your questions. What does it look like for supervision and mentorship and support? And I will say what's interesting to me is that the school districts who are keeping their speech language therapists are the school districts that are honoring them as human beings before the compliance. And I think if we actually did this, and this was something we talked about more, school district leadership is going to change their ways, because if they don't keep the people and they don't have the people, they are going to be even more out of compliance. And so I think that is the first thing. And then the other part is, the good, the bad, the ugly of social media is that there are people talking about the law is actually on your side. And I tell school-based SLPs, they need us. Like the power is actually within our realm because there's not enough of us. So do your work and know that when you walk into a space, they get to have you, not please take me and just hire me. Like ask them questions. And there are beautiful districts out there right now. There's too much work across the board in all settings. Done. But there are beautiful organizations that are like, this is how we support you. I have a district that's a large district in Texas where they will go to every single IEP meeting until the new person says, okay, I feel good. I don't need help anymore. We have others where they get two mentors on each side that's close to them and also with their area that they're passionate about. And so there's beautiful things that are also happening, but you just have to be aware of it and take that power back as an individual.
I like to say they need us more than we need them. I've said that in multiple podcasts. We have to keep remembering that they need us more than we need them, because there are many jobs out there, and the one around the corner might, like you said, might be one of those beautiful jobs that is going to support me. And so we have to ask those questions. Yeah.
And to follow up on this idea that the law is on our side, it's also about districts and larger systems understanding our patients as human beings. Like IDAs, I don't know the ins and outs of IDAs, but I'm sure the goal, the purpose of IDA original was not to make students say sentences when presented with a sequence of pictures. That is not what IDA is about. So I would say keep in mind that you are the expert. I'm talking to the SLP out there. You are the expert on human communication. And if your employer doesn't allow you to provide intervention that leads to better, more functional communication for your students, they're out of compliance. Maybe not with the written IEP goals for the year, but with the larger spirit of all these laws.
I want to jump back to these solutions and the forward focused thinking that we've already brought up a little bit. Because at Fix SLP, we can be highly critical of a lot of things, but the word fix is in our title. And we always do want to encourage people to get out there. We can't do it for you. We can't do all the things. SLP is a community, and we all need to be doing our part. And our parts sometimes look different. Like you said, Tobias, you might not have that networking piece in you, but we're all parts of a puzzle. We all have different personality traits that are important for a reason, and they're not bad. We just have to figure out how to contribute to that advocacy work, whether it be in schools or in hospitals or nursing homes. And so Phuong already gave this great idea of ASHA on how a broader level they could be helping. But what can SLPs do to transform that self-care that we're talking about into this collective care and advocacy, and all kind of doing their part? Like maybe somebody doesn't have a loud mouth, but there's something they could be doing to help. I know this is maybe a hard question to answer, but advocacy isn't going to look the same for every single one of us. So what are some things people could be doing where they do feel safe and comfortable and can bring their personality traits into that really important work?
I mean, one thing that you could do as a clinician, if the people around you are not listening to you, print our article, take it to people higher up who have something to say, and wave it right in their face and tell them, look, if I were to take care of myself and take care of my students, we would be permanently out of compliance because this workload is ridiculous and those goals are too. Tell them, and here's the research to prove it.
Phuong, I see your brain. Are you thinking you got some ways people can advocate?
Oh, I always feel like I'm always thinking, but I will concisely say that in my experience, when it comes to advocacy with our leadership, is that one, you have to take care of your own life, so set those boundaries and stay true to those. Do the things that you need to do, put them on your schedule. Fong is going to go work out because I get to work out in the same way that I'm going to put down a calendar date to go to an IEP meeting. But something that I've learned that whenever we do advocate, and this is where I may disagree with you, Kroll, is if we wave research in their faces, usually that wall will go higher sometimes in my corner of the world. And this may not be true everywhere. But if you start by doing student-centered advocacy and saying, here's what our students need right now, because that's something that everyone will always agree on. And then the next circle is, these are the resources we need. And we are one of those resources. And we are actually the biggest resource. And if you look at it through their lens, I always think about what are other people thinking. And the leadership is thinking about things through compliance and funding. But if you take our research and you funnel it through that lens and you talk about, okay, how much does it cost for every special education student within the district? And we're losing them, or we're not providing services, or they're no longer. And so when you talk about it through that compliance and that funding aspect, I have seen leadership respond in huge ways because it impacts their roles and responsibilities. So I actually stopped talking about best practice. I talk about research, but I funnel it through student-centered practices because they're not going to disagree with me there. Then I talk about the resources and how we keep our people. And so I go in kind of through those means. And then if you feel safe enough, advocate collectively. Don't do it alone because you're going to feel like you're still alone. So do it together, and that you can't ever lose, whether or not they are able to respond to your advocacy in that moment. So that's my 3 cents worth. That's more than 2 cents worth.
We talk a lot about fear around here, and I think that group advocacy is important. People have maybe fear, or they don't feel safe with administrators or colleagues. We see at Fix SLP fear of each other, and I think we see that a lot on social media too, with this new anonymous posting and commenting feature, that even in groups where we should be getting along and coming together, we attack each other. And so from the other side of that, making sure that when people are asking questions or bringing up issues, even if you don't agree with what they're asking or saying, not attacking, because people need safe spaces in our community. And if we keep doing this to each other, we're going to end up being our own worst enemies. We're never going to be able to come together if all we do is attack each other. And so finding some like-minded people in whatever way you can through social media outlets or at your job, or if you're in a silo where you are the only SLP in a rural school district, trying to find ways to connect with other people, I think is important. Because it really helps to have those work besties, even if you don't work with them, to go to come together and find ideas and solutions that work. And this comes from me in silos in nursing homes, that once I started finding my people, that none of them I work with, things really started to change and kind of how I functioned within my work environment. So it's really helpful for advocacy. So one final thought. Okay, someone has listened to this. We're at the bottom of the episode now. People are overwhelmed. They've got to set boundaries. They need to have conversations. There's things they need to do. What is the one thing they can start with? One thing, they turn this off. One thing our listener can go do to start something, whether it be a boundary or a conversation. One thing.
I think for me, as someone who has gone through burnout and has clinical depression and clinical anxiety and been through seasons where I felt the world on my shoulders. I think the one thing is figuring out what you need as a human being, SLP. And your SLP is secondary to you being a person. And so is it 10 minutes of just quiet time outside? Is it saying that I get to do this? Because if you're well, fill up your well, and then whatever is the overflow, then feed that to the rest of the world. But without making that one big change, which has taken years, I wouldn't be where I am today. And Dr. Kroll was a part of that. And so I feel like when you start prioritizing you first and then everything else, everything else is going to take time. But you still get to be you all 365 days out of the year, not just your summer months or your weekend that you're looking forward to or that one holiday that you get randomly.
I want to just say what you just said was so beautiful, and it sounds so easy, but I want to say to the listener that what she just said is not always easy to do. I am going through that personally right now, and you guys are seeing that on the other side where you're not seeing podcasts come out on time. You are not seeing as much content as we usually put out. My SLP teammates aren't hearing back from me. My husband is starting to learn that I might not text him back within 5 minutes of him sending, because I'm putting the phone in a different room. I'm taking off my smartwatch. Those things are hard. And the people around you that you've taught that you will do the thing that you're no longer going to do, they might get a little bit cranky. So what she said sounded really pretty, but it's actual work that we have to do to take care of ourselves. And we also might lose people from our lives in that process, but they shouldn't be there in the first place. If you lose someone because you're taking care of yourself like that, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So I loved that advice. It is my journey. I'm trying not to cry because I am literally in that trench right now. And it's hard. It's hard to make those changes and take care of yourself like that, especially if you've been not doing it for a very long time.
It's hard. And that's when I wrote that book in 2019. So this is now 6 years later, but you still have to make choices every single day. But it's worth it because this is the one life that we get to live.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Yeah. How about you, Tobias? Is there one thing you think people can go do?
Everything that Phuong said, slow down, find your quiet, and then from that space, really consider, do you want to live and work like this? And to add one more thing to that, if you're the listener, if you are one of those people who say yes a lot to all kinds of extra tasks that aren't strictly necessary, I encourage you to start saying no. To start with one no to something that's not really needed or not from you.
Love that.
I'm going to do a quick plug that's unrelated to your question. We are doing a follow-up survey because we want to know how widespread this stuff is, right? So at some point soon, we'll send out mass emails to all the schools, SLPs in the country that we can reach and ask them to do a quick survey that essentially follows up on that study.
If it's okay, we'd love to highlight that, if that's okay.
Would love to.
Yes. We don't typically post links to surveys and research, but a couple times I sneak them in there. So we're happy to put that out as well.
Thank you.
Because sometimes that leadership doesn't pass those things on, but we've got pretty big reach. So we'll post it.
Much appreciated.
Okay. Tell us where people can find you guys if they want to connect, if they want to see more of your work, if they want to follow you. Where are you guys hanging out other than your office?
I have a website, which is my name, and then I show up on Instagram here and there, Facebook a little bit less.
Okay. We will have Phuong's website linked in the show notes, and maybe we'll even link her social media handles so you can go follow her.
I have a website too. It's my name.com, and I have a LinkedIn profile. I am also on Instagram, mainly because Phuong kept saying, come, you need to be there. That's where the action is. Y'all, I'm too old for that. I don't understand it. I'm not doing anything on there. Sorry.
The action is there for us old people. You know that that's not where the young kids are. They're over on the TikTok.
Yeah, know even less about that. So for me, then it's the old-fashioned way: a website, my LinkedIn, and the ResearchGate profile. If anybody's on ResearchGate, you should be able to download the article that this was all about. If not, just contact me on there and send it to you.
And has the Informed SLP covered this article? I can't imagine they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're a subscriber to Informed SLP, go check them out. Little plug there. They're not paying for that, but I subscribe, but not to the school-based stuff or pediatric stuff, so I don't see. So we'll link up all the websites and the handles and things in our show notes. And thank you for taking this time.
Thank you so much.
We so appreciate you. And before we wrap up, everybody, remember, we've got our Fix SLP After Dark meetup going on in DC during the ASHA convention on Friday the 21st. Tickets at fixslp.com. Preston absolutely just disappeared. So he's saying goodbye to you, I assume. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for fixing it. Thanks for listening to the Fix SLP podcast, the podcast shaking up the field of speech-language pathology. Don't forget to check out our social media or fixslp.com for our latest promo codes for continuing education, therapy materials, merch, and more. Supporting our sponsors also supports our Fix SLP team. Don't just listen, be a part of the change. Share this episode and our social media content, and let's keep fixing the field one fight at a time.